In the quiet town of Maplewood, 2 children vanished without a trace. No ransom note, no signs of struggle, no witnesses, just gone. They were twins, 8 years old, identical in every way and inseparable since birth. Their disappearance left behind more questions than answers, and decades later, the case still haunts investigators, neighbors, and even those who never knew them. Because the truth is, the mystery of the Vanishing Twins goes deeper than anyone first imagined. This isn't just a missing persons case. It's a story laced with eerie coincidences, unanswered calls, and a chilling piece of evidence found years later that changed everything. But let's start at the beginning. The last day anyone saw the twins alive. It was the summer of 1997. Maplewood was the kind of place people moved to when they wanted to feel safe. A small suburban town where kids played freely in the streets, and neighbors left their doors unlocked. The Harrison family lived at the end of Willow Creek Lane, in a 2-story brick home with white shutters. Inside that house lived Emma and Ethan, twins who were known to everyone in the neighborhood. They were polite, cheerful, and practically identical except for the tiny birthmark under Ethan's left ear. On the afternoon of July 14th, the twins were last seen riding their bikes down to Maplewood Park, a routine they followed nearly every day after lunch. It wasn't unusual. Their parents trusted the neighborhood. The park was just 6 blocks away. But on that day, something felt different. By evening, when dinner time came and went, the Harrisons grew uneasy. By 8 p.m., panic had set in. Their bikes were never found. Their laughter never returned. And the street that had once been filled with children's voices suddenly grew silent. The police were called immediately. Officers swarmed the park, the woods behind it, and every street corner. Neighbors joined the search, holding flashlights, calling out the children's names until their throats were raw. But not a single clue surfaced that night. No bikes, no shoes, no scraps of clothing. It was as though the twins had been erased from existence in broad daylight. Detectives questioned everyone, parents, neighbors, even the twins' classmates. But nobody saw anything unusual. Nobody noticed a strange car. Nobody remembered a suspicious person lurking nearby. And that was the most terrifying part. In the weeks that followed, investigators worked around the clock. Flyers plastered telephone poles, supermarkets, and gas stations. The twins' smiling faces became a constant reminder of a nightmare. The FBI got involved. Bloodhounds were brought in, but they couldn't trace a scent beyond the park. It was as if the trail ended right there, cut off suddenly, like a door slammed shut. One theory suggested the twins had been abducted by someone they knew. Another proposed a stranger with meticulous planning. But the absence of evidence only deepened the mystery. Meanwhile, the Harrison family's life shattered. Their mother, Claire, couldn't bring herself to enter the twins' room. Their father, David, spent every waking hour chasing down tips that led nowhere. And yet, the strangest detail would emerge not from the police, but from a neighbor across the street. On the night of the disappearance, Mrs. Collins, a widow who lived 2 houses down, swore she heard children laughing around 9:30 p.m. She described it as faint, like it was carried on the wind. But when she looked outside, the street was empty. At first, investigators dismissed it. The twins were last seen hours earlier, and no other neighbor reported the same. But Mrs. Collins insisted. She knew the sound of the Harrison twins' voices. She had baked cookies with them just a week before. So what did she hear that night? 2 weeks later, the Harrison family's phone rang at 2:17 a.m. When Claire answered, all she heard was silence. Then, faintly, the sound of breathing. And then 2 voices, childlike, whispering, too faint to make out the words. The line went dead. The call was traced, but the origin was unhelpful. It come from a payphone miles away, located at a deserted rest stop off the interstate. By the time authorities arrived, the booth was empty, but the detail that chilled investigators? That rest stop was connected by a highway that led directly out of Maplewood. Months passed. Leads dried up. The case went cold. Yet whispers of the twins lingered. Some claimed to see 2 children standing by the woods at dusk, holding hands, vanishing when approached. Others dismissed it as grief playing tricks on the mind. But one piece of evidence, discovered years later, would reignite the case. In 2005, nearly a decade after the twins vanished, a construction crew breaking ground near Maplewood stumbled upon something buried beneath the soil. Something that didn't belong there. And what they found would unravel everything investigators thought they knew about the Vanishing Twins. The year was 2005, and Maplewood had long since tried to bury its scars. Families had moved away. New residents had moved in. And for some, the Harrison twins were nothing more than a tragic story whispered over fences or remembered when an old flyer still clung to a forgotten telephone pole. But for the detectives who had once pored over every inch of the case, and for the Harrison family themselves, the nightmare had never really ended. It was on a brisk autumn morning when the call came in. A construction crew, digging the foundation for a new row of homes near the edge of Maplewood, had unearthed something strange. At first, they thought it was nothing more than an old box, rusted and worn from years underground. But when one worker pried it open, the contents made his stomach turn. Inside the box was a collection of children's belongings. A pair of small sneakers, neatly placed side by side, a faded hair ribbon, and a school notebook with the name Ethan Harrison, scrawled in a child's handwriting across the front. The items were carefully wrapped in plastic, preserved as though someone would want to keep them hidden, yet safe from time. The discovery sent shockwaves through the town. The site was immediately shut down, and investigators rushed to the scene. The items were real. The shoes matched the twin sizes, and the notebook was unmistakably Ethan's, with doodles and math problems on its pages. But there was something else. At the bottom of the box, stuck between the plastic wrapping, was a Polaroid photograph. It was blurry, the kind of image you'd expect from a camera held by unsteady hands. But in the center of the frame, two children stood side by side, their faces turned away from the camera. They wore clothes eerily similar to what Emma and Ethan had last been seen in. Behind them was a wooded area, dense with trees, but investigators could not identify the exact location. The photograph was dated July 16, 1997, 2 days after the twins had vanished. This discovery breathed life into a case many thought was long dead. For Claire and David Harrison, it was agony mixed with a cruel form of hope. If the photograph was real, did that mean their children had been alive, at least for some time, after their disappearance? And if they were alive, then what happened after? Detectives reopened the investigation with renewed urgency. Old witnesses were re-interviewed. Every lead that had once gone cold was thawed and examined again. But the most disturbing part wasn't the photograph. It was the fact that the box had been buried deliberately. Whoever had placed it there wanted it hidden, but also wanted it preserved. It was almost like leaving behind a message, or worse, the trophy. The construction site itself raised further questions. That plot of land had been empty in 1997, a patch of woods and overgrowth. Only in recent years had it been cleared for development, which meant whoever buried the box had chosen a place they believed would remain untouched. Did they know Maplewood well enough to predict that? Or was it someone local, hiding evidence right under the community's nose? As the police combed through records, something unsettling surfaced. In the months before the twins' disappearance, there had been multiple reports of a white van parked near Maplewood Park. Residents described it as old, with tinted windows, sometimes there for hours at a time, sometimes vanishing for days. No one had thought much of it back then. After all, vans came and went, but when investigators tried to track down the owner, the registration records led to a dead end. The van was never traced, never found. Detectives began to wonder, had the twins been lured into that vehicle? And if so, who had been behind the wheel? More chilling still was a testimony that resurfaced from a boy who had been 12 at the time of the disappearance. He told police he remembered walking home from the park the same day the twins were last seen. As he passed the woods, he thought he saw two children moving deeper among the trees, hand in hand. He called out, but they didn't respond. At the time, he assumed it was just some kids playing and he kept walking. Only years later did he admit he believed it was Emma and Ethan. If that was true, the twins had entered the woods willingly. But why? And who were they meeting, if anyone? As investigators pieced these fragments together, Another chilling lead came from the forensic analysis of the items found in the box. The plastic wrapping contained partial fingerprints. Most were smudged, impossible to match. But one, faint yet distinct, belonged to a man named Richard Hale. Richard Hale was a drifter. He'd lived in multiple towns across the state, often working temporary construction jobs, then moving on. In 1997, records placed him in Maplewood, living less than 5 miles from Willow Creek Lane. He had a minor criminal record, nothing violent, mostly petty theft. But in 1998, just months after the twins vanished, he disappeared. No forwarding address, no paper trail. It was as though he had simply evaporated. The possibility that Hale had taken the twins sent investigators scrambling. They tracked down old acquaintances, co-workers, anyone who might have seen him. But every lead ended the same way. Hale had left, and no one knew where he'd gone. Meanwhile, the Harrison family received a letter in the mail. There was no return address, no name. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 4 words written in uneven block letters. They never left Maplewood. The letter was turned over to the police, but forensic analysis found nothing. No fingerprints, no DNA, nothing to trace its origin. For the Harrisons, it was torture. Was it a cruel hoax, or a clue from someone who knew more than they were willing to say? The case once again consumed Maplewood. Parents kept their children close. Rumors spread like wildfire, and the police were pressured to solve what had become the town's darkest mystery. Yet for every clue they found, new questions emerged. Who buried the box? Where had Richard Hale gone? And most importantly, were Emma and Ethan still alive when that photograph was taken? One detective, years later, would admit that the most unsettling part of the case wasn't what they found, but what they didn't. There was no sign of struggle, no confirmed sighting of the twins after that day, and no evidence of a crime scene. It was as though someone had carefully orchestrated their disappearance, step by step, leaving behind only enough to keep the mystery alive. And then, in 2012, another discovery pulled the case back into the headlines. A hunter, walking through the thick woods just outside Maplewood, stumbled across something strange, a small wooden shack, hidden deep among the trees, abandoned and rotting with age. Inside, there were children's drawings pinned to the walls. Some were faded, barely legible, but one drawing in particular froze investigators in their tracks. It was of 2 children, a boy and a girl, standing side by side, holding hands. And written in a child's handwriting at the bottom were 2 names, Emma and Ethan. The shack raised horrifying possibilities. Had the twins been held there? Had they lived for some time after their disappearance? Hidden in plain sight? And if so, who had kept them there? And what had become of them after? The mystery was far from over. In fact, the discovery of the shack suggested something darker, something that pointed not just to a single man like Richard Hale, but to the possibility of something far larger, something Maplewood had never dared to imagine. And the truth, as investigators would soon uncover, was far more terrifying than anyone expected. By the time investigators stumbled across the shack in 2012, the Vanishing Twins case had become one of Maplewood's deepest scars. For 15 years, the town had lived under the shadow of unanswered questions. But the shack, with its eerie drawings pinned to the walls, felt like a silent witness. The discovery was both terrifying and strangely hopeful. It suggested that Emma and Ethan may have survived for some time after their disappearance. Inside, aside from the drawings, investigators found scraps of old food wrappers, an old mattress stained and rotting, and a rusted lantern. Everything pointed to the shack being lived in at some point, though no one could determine exactly when. Forensics teams combed every inch of the cabin, lifting fibers, hairs, and fingerprints, but most were too degraded to analyze. The only clear evidence came from a small metal tin tucked beneath a floorboard. Inside that tin was a lock of blonde hair, tied with the same ribbon that Emma had often worn. Alongside it was a page torn from Ethan's old notebook. On the page were numbers, written over and over again, almost obsessively. 1997, 1998, 2005. Dates that seemed random at first, until detectives remembered the significance. 1997 was the year the twins vanished. 2005 was when the box was unearthed. And 1998 no one could explain. As investigators puzzled over the meaning, suspicions once again returned to Richard Hale, the drifter whose fingerprint had been found in the buried box years earlier. Hale had vanished shortly after the twins disappeared, but new evidence suggested he hadn't disappeared completely. A private investigator, hired by a true crime enthusiast fascinated with the case, tracked Hale's name to a small rural town 2 states away. There, under a different alias, someone matching Hale's description had worked odd jobs until 2002 before vanishing again. What's more, an old photo surfaced of him sitting outside a diner, with a white van parked behind him. The FBI reclassified Hale as the prime suspect, but finding him was another matter. Every lead seemed to evaporate just as quickly as it appeared. While the manhunt for Hale intensified, Maplewood itself became haunted by rumors. People whispered about the shack. Some claimed to hear children's voices near the woods at night. Others swore they saw 2 figures standing at the tree line, always hand in hand, disappearing if approached. The case had begun to blur the line between reality and folklore, but in 2015, the breakthrough finally came. A hunter, miles from Maplewood, stumbled across human remains near a dried-up creek bed. Forensic analysis confirmed what many had feared but never wanted to believe. The bones belonged to Ethan Harrison. He had died young, but the cause of death was inconclusive. There were no clear signs of violence. Only time and nature had erased too many details. The discoveries shattered what little hope Claire and David Harrison still held. But it also raised an even more pressing question. Where was Emma? The investigation shifted once more. For years, people had speculated that the twins had either died together or survived together. But the fact that only Ethan's remains were found suggested something more complex. Had Emma survived longer? Was she still alive somewhere? The answer came unexpectedly from the past. An old social worker, retired and living in another state, reached out after seeing a documentary on the case. She claimed that in 1999, 2 years after the twins' disappearance, she remembered a little girl being brought into her office under strange circumstances. The girl was withdrawn, refused to speak, and bore a striking resemblance to Emma Harrison. But before the social worker could look deeper, the girl was transferred to another facility, and the paperwork vanished from the system. The lead electrified investigators. If true, it meant Emma had survived at least 2 years after being taken. But why had she disappeared again? And who had hidden her within the system? The deeper detectives dug, the clearer the picture became. Richard Hale had worked odd construction jobs near the facility where the girl had been taken. His name surfaced again and again, always in the shadows, always slipping away before he could be caught. By 2017, the FBI declared Hale not just a suspect, but the likely abductor. Yet he was still missing. Some believed he was dead. Others believed he was still alive, hiding in plain sight. The final chapter in the Vanishing Twins case came in 2019, when a woman stepped forward with a story that stunned the nation. She was in her early 30s, living under a different name, but she believed she was Emma Harrison. At first, investigators were cautious. Over the years, dozens of people had come forward falsely claiming to be Emma, but this woman's story was different. She remembered details about Maplewood only the real Emma could know. She recalled the shack, the smell of damp wood, and even the drawings on the walls. Most hauntingly, she remembered her brother, Ethan, and the day he never came back. DNA tests confirmed what many had barely dared to hope. She was Emma Harrison. Her survival was nothing short of a miracle. But Emma's story was not one of hope. It was one of horror. She revealed that she and Ethan had been lured by a man in a white van the day they disappeared. He promised them candy and games, then drove them deep into the woods. For months, he kept them in the shack. At first, they were together, but one day, Ethan was taken away, and Emma never saw him again. She was moved from place to place, sometimes hidden in homes, sometimes in foster systems under fake names, always controlled, always silenced. Richard Hale, she confirmed, was the man who took them, but she revealed something more chilling. Hale hadn't acted alone. There were others, people who helped him, people who knew, people who turned a blind eye. She remembered overhearing voices, conversations about money, about keeping the girl quiet. To this day, Emma believes that's why she vanished from the system and reappeared years later with a different identity. Though Richard Hale himself was never found, Emma's testimony finally brought closure to Maplewood. The FBI concluded that Hale was almost certainly responsible for the abduction, with possible accomplices whose identities remain unknown. Ethan's remains were laid to rest, and Emma, now an adult, began the painful process of rebuilding her life. The case of the Vanishing Twins became one of the most haunting reminders that evil can exist in the unlikeliest of places, and that sometimes the answers we seek come not from evidence or forensics, but from the resilience of a survivor willing to tell the truth. For the Harrison family, the nightmare never truly ended. They lost one child and gained another back scarred forever. But for investigators in the community of Maplewood, the mystery that once consumed them finally reached its end. And even now, years later, locals say that on quiet summer nights, if you walk past the old woods where the shack once stood, you might still hear the faint laughter of two children carried on the wind. One voice gone, one voice surviving. Echoes of a case that will never be forgotten.